your attachment style is basically the way that you learn to relate to love via your caretakers at a very young age, really before the age of 3, generously up to the age of 7. And depending on how you were treated at that time on an emotional level is reflective of how you will act in your adult relationships, and heavily weighs on how you perceive love internally.
Welcome to the Asian Dating Podcast. I'm your host, May Bugenhagen. I am the founder of Two Asian Matchmakers, which is a boutique matchmaking company that started in Los Angeles, California, and I help men all across the US find an Asian woman. So if you're looking for a lovely Asian woman, contact me at twoasianmatchmakers.com. And this week I have Flora, who is joining me, Flora Ong, who is a certified life coach and integrated attachment specialist, matchmaker, and one of the top 5 relationship coaches to watch in 2022. She is dedicated to empowering individuals and helping them achieve their relationship goals. With a deep understanding of attachment styles and subconscious reprogramming, Flora's focus is on breaking self-sabotaging behaviors in order to cultivate a healthy and lasting sense of self that leads to deep and authentic connections. So I'm going to put all of her information in the show notes. So welcome to the show, Flora. How are you?
Thank you. I'm really good. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining me. I know attachment styles is such a big topic in the dating world, but before we jump into that, can you tell the audience how you got started in the dating industry and what provoked you to make this change on helping people with understanding the attachment styles?
Yeah, I mean, there's a saying, make your mess your message. I don't know if you've heard that, but that's what I did. So I got divorced about 7 years ago, and I got out into the dating market, specifically on the apps. And I always I think I owe my whole career to Tinder, quite honestly. And I thought it was going to be really easy. There were a lot of people. There was like a lot of traction. I thought, oh, this is, I'll find someone in no time. And as most people know, it's not that easy. But what I found mostly was that I was dating. I felt like I was 16 years old all over again. I was falling head over heels in love with people very quickly and getting very attached very easily, and not really not with people that didn't deserve it, with people that weren't reciprocating properly, and very much like the unavailable types. And it got really obvious to me that it wasn't them, it was me. At the time I was studying to be a health and life coach, so I was hyper aware of what was going on, but at the same time couldn't change it. And at some point, I ended up reading the book Attached. And that book really blew my mind and changed my life and really changed the trajectory of my career and my future, quite frankly, because it illuminated exactly what was happening to me, what was going on with me internally. And it didn't quite give me the avenue to solve it and resolve it, but it opened the door for me to understand myself in a way that I had never understood before.
I love how a book changed your life. Isn't that amazing that something so powerful that you got your hands on, and now it's like completely changed your life for the better, right? It helped you better understand yourself and to help other people. So, but what are attachment styles? Talk to me as if I've never read the book and I know nothing about what you're saying.
So, I mean, attachment styles have become like the new buzzword, oh my God, my brain is blanking. Love languages, sorry. However, the difference is that attachment styles have been studied clinically for many years, and there are hundreds and hundreds of studies to prove and confirm the validity of attachment theory. and specifically into adulthood. So that's really the big and important difference. It's really not pop culture science. It's real, genuine science. And your attachment style is basically the way that you learn to relate to love via your caretakers at a very young age, really before the age of 3, generously up to the age of 7. And depending on how you were treated at that time on an emotional level is reflective of how you will act in your adult relationships, and heavily weighs on how you perceive love internally.
So, what's an example of maybe a client that you helped that had a certain way of upbringing and how they were socialized and what they thought about love, and then now how they acted as an adult? Can you provide an example with that?
Yeah, of course. So, there are 4 attachment styles. And the first one is secure. So that's kind of the healthy one, where your emotions were properly attuned to, when your parents were, supported your emotional landscape growing up, and they helped you to repair properly. And, they would get down to eye level and say, oh, you're hurt. Like, it's okay. Understand that wasn't nice, but, we pick ourselves up and let's go, we'll walk together, and that kind of nurturing. And they did that enough times throughout different circumstances that made you feel really safe with your emotions and allowed you to express your emotions as an adult in a healthy way, because you felt like, oh, people care about my emotions, and this is fine to express it. It's not weird. On the other hand, when you have an insecure attachment style, which is the 3 are anxious, avoidant, and then fearful avoidant, or disorganized. That one has, for some reason, many different names. But for example, with the anxious attachment style, there was an inconsistency typically in that type of attunement. So sometimes they would be attuned to your emotions, and sometimes they wouldn't. And I am primarily anxious. So for me, it was that my parents were immigrants and they were working all the time. So when they were around, they were loving and kind and wonderful. But when they weren't, and that was most of the time, I was left kind of on my own with a grandparent, or, with others who, kind of always missing that parental love, let's say. And that created this inconsistency, right? So as an adult, what happens is it creates this inconsistency, but it also creates an abandonment wound, because your parents are always leaving, right? They're always, like my parents, they were always out of the house. And so I never knew when they were coming back, because when you're 2, you don't understand what an hour is. You don't understand they'll be back after work. You just think, mommy doesn't love me, daddy doesn't love me, they're leaving me, And so you're also like in this perpetual state of waiting for them to come back. So when you're dating and this guy that you like is like, oh, I'll call you. Well, when the fuck are you going to call me? You could call me in 10 minutes. Sorry, I don't know if we're allowed to curse here. You're going to call me in an hour? You're going to call me in 3 days? Like, well, you said you were going to call, And so you have this kind of inside, it makes you nervous. Uncertainty in that regard makes you nervous, because you don't understand what you like this person, and because those feelings are coming up, it reminds you internally, subconsciously, of that parental relationship way back when. On the avoidant side, more than likely, their parents neglected their emotional needs completely. So a lot of times I, for the sake of example, I like to use the cried out method. Are you familiar with the cried out method for kids? I don't know how you missed that one. It was a big thing. Some doctor came up with this idea that you're supposed to let your kids cry it out, some pediatrician back in the day in the 80s, 70s. And they thought it was a really good idea to let little babies whose only way of communicating is to cry, to let them cry it out until they fell asleep. So that if that was 5 hours straight of crying, then too bad, kid, you're going to just fall asleep on your own and good luck. And so a lot of our kids, or a whole generation of people, kind of came from that. And their emotional needs, that's just, again, one example, right? But like their emotional needs were very neglected. And so they learned to only become hyper independent and depend only on themselves. And again, what's really important to understand, this is happening before 3. You're learning this on an internal, inherent level. This isn't like a conscious thought process. This is, nobody's coming. Nobody's going to save me. I have to take care of myself. People are not safe because they're not going to help me. And the people that love me are never really going to be there for me. And so you end up as an adult with these types of people tend to be they don't commit for a long time, or when it comes to commitment, they really pull back a lot from commitment. They might seem fine and great until they feel overwhelmed by the commitment or by the relationship, and then they go cold. And it can be scary as hell for the other person, for the person on the other side, because you're like, what happened? Like, where we were just in love, you just told me you love me, and now I haven't spoken, like, you won't answer your phone. Like, are you okay? It can be that harsh. I mean, there's different levels and everybody's on a spectrum. So, and then the last one is the disorganized one. That's a mix of both anxious and avoidant. And typically, not always, but typically it comes from some real abuse in childhood, where they became afraid of their caretakers. And so, the people that love them also hurt them, a lot of times in physical, sexual, mental, emotional ways. And so they are very, very distrusting in dating, very hot and cold. They really, really want relationship, and they'll be really, really into it. And then they'll, the second it comes to them, they get really scared and they like pull back and pull away. So it's a very kind of general, brief description of the attachment styles.
Which one is the most popular that people end up being? Is it anxious?
I mean, the stats are, and I don't believe this at all, but the general stats are that the 50% of the population is secure. And then it's about anxious and avoidant are somewhat equal. And then the fearful avoidant or the disorganized is about 5% of the population. But it's hard to kind of collect proper stats on this because a lot of it is self-reported. And yeah, but that's the numbers out there, give or take.
So are you saying the people who are secure, the 50% who categorizes them as the secure attachment style, they don't need therapy and they don't need as much date coaching? Like, is that the case? Like, or no?
Not at all. Many secure people will end up in relationships with people who are either anxious or avoidant. And typically they do have the kinds of patience to deal with them and the understanding to deal with them and the emotional capacity to handle it. But with avoidant, especially a person who's avoidant, anxious people, because they're anxious and because it's bothersome to them, they want to figure out what's going on and what's wrong. So they will more than likely seek out help, therapy, or try and figure out this problem. Avoidant people don't think anything is wrong. They don't understand that how they're acting or what they're doing is wrong. They just think, I need space and I'm going to take my space, because that's how everybody deals with conflict. But it's not. And until they know that there's something wrong with that, they don't really even think that they're doing anything wrong. So a lot of times secure people will get involved with avoidant people, and avoidance breeds anxiety and anxiety breeds avoidance. So if somebody you love is pulling away from you and you're perfectly secure, you're going to be like, what, why are you pulling away? What's going on? And then they're like, leave me alone, leave me alone. You're like, but why? But why? But why? So it becomes like, this like cycle that takes on a life of its own. And so I do end up with a lot of secure people that were in relationship with avoidance and, kind of are peeling that part of themselves apart. And then, it's a spectrum, right? So there's times we all feel secure. There's times we can be a little bit avoidant, areas in our life, where these different kind of personality traits and coping mechanisms come up. And so, even if you are secure, it's not like you're 100% secure all of the time, right? Like, yeah,
So a secure person would be doing well with another person who's also secure. So if you're avoidance or anxious, do you try to work on yourself to become secure is that the goal, to be as secure in a relationship like that? Like,
I mean, yeah, that so most everybody does better with a secure partner. And yes, the goal ultimately is, if you have an insecure attachment style, is to feel more secure, is to be more secure. Yes, for sure.
and that's what you help your clients with, is how to get to that somewhat secure space?
Yes,
Okay.
yes,
Okay.
100%. Yeah.
So why does someone always choose unavailable partners? Like, what do you think is the reason why someone would go after somebody who is unavailable?
Well, so the craziest part of all of this is, and this is a lot of times where people even find this information, is because they end up in a toxic relationship. I would say 95% of toxic relationships are a result of this. The attachment styles, the wrong attachment styles getting together, and people not being aware of it. So we talked about the anxious person having this patterning from childhood of inconsistency, like their parents were around and then they weren't, their parents were attuned and then they weren't, so they're internally from a baby. And I just want to say that this can change, this can kind of happen like as an adult as well, or kind of in your teens, like if you have like a bad relationship or something, so your attachment style can develop or change later, but typically it does happen at a very young age. So when you have this patterning of inconsistency, and then you meet an avoidant person and they're like, oh, you're great, you're great, you're great, this is wonderful, this relationship is great, and then they pull back, and then they get their space, and then they come back and they're like, it's great, but then they need to pull back again because it's too emotional for them. What does that create for the anxious person? This patterning from childhood of inconsistency, right? Like, and it's so familiar to this anxious person that they think they're in love because it's reminding them on an internal level of how they grew up. And so they become attached, right? Like they really, really become attached to these avoidant people. And the avoidants have their own, thing in here too. They also have they don't get attached in the same way, but they also are very attracted to the anxious person, because the anxious person typically is very emotional and very like open with their emotions, and they don't have that capacity because they weren't raised that way necessarily. And so they really, they like idealize it and they think it's like this wonderful thing, but they also can't handle it because it's too like on longer term, it's kind of too emotional for them, and they're not comfortable dealing with their emotions because they never learned how.
So the best way is for people to figure out what style they are and then work on developing and recognizing their patterns and how they act, so they could be a better partner for their
Yes.
loved ones. As you're talking about all this, I know you're a parent of 2 kids, right? So Do you apply these attachment style theories to how you raise your kids in a sense? Like you want them to be secure, and so you're being mindful of how you talk to them and being there for them? Like, is that helping you be a better parent too?
I mean, I do now, right? I wish I would have known much earlier, in all honesty. I'm divorced, so, and I didn't learn this stuff until after that. And so I do wish I had this knowledge like from the beginning, but yes, 100%. I'm very conscious of my kids' emotions. Something I was not raised with, because I don't know. I mean, I'm Soviet Ukrainian. My parents came from Soviet Russia, from the Ukraine, and kids were meant to be seen and not heard, right? So that's how I grew up. Like, stop crying, leave me alone, go over there, kind of thing. I mean, again, my parents were loving in their own way, but none of our parents, I don't think, were properly skilled in emotional, like attunement and regulation. And so I'm very conscious of my kids' emotions. If they come to me with something, if they're slightly upset, I lean in. I don't yell and scream that they're annoying me, and I really try to take care of them as much as I can on an emotional level these days.
Yeah, because you said that they developed this up to age 3, but then your kids are over 3 now, but it's not too late, right? To still try to help.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's never too late, and you would be surprised. I heard a statistic once, and I can't quote from where, so maybe somebody will find find it, but that the kids need up like as little as 30% of the time of your like emotional attunement. So if you do it 30% of the time, they will more than likely end up with a secure attachment style. It doesn't have to be every single moment and every single time, and it really is about a healthy balance. It's not about coddling kids. It's about teaching them, an appropriate way to deal with their emotions, an appropriate way to be angry, an appropriate way to deal with their anger, an appropriate way to repair relationships, to communicate about that kinds of stuff. It's not about just coddling their emotions all the time.
Yeah, you mentioned repairing relationships. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Like, do you mean in a relationship, if something goes wrong, how do you fix that, or how do you um, repair that without there being resentment and bad feelings? Like, what's the proper way to repair a relationship?
That's like probably the most important aspect of this, and really what it comes down is how did you grow up dealing with conflict, right? What did conflict mean in your house? Did it mean things got worse, that people stopped talking to each other, that there were fights and yelling and screaming, or was there resolution, right? And I mean, the right way to repair a relationship is to focus on the problem as a team, and as a team work out the problem that is outside of you and me, right? But what happens a lot of time when there's conflict is you did this, you're that, and when you're blaming somebody else, there's no option but for them to go on the defensive, typically, right? You have to be a very healthy, astute person to not jump to the defensive when somebody's kind of attacking you in a certain way, or attacking what feels like they're attacking your character. And there's a lot of nuance, obviously, into how to communicate and what the right ways are, but essentially that's the idea, is that you want to be able to address the problem. The problem is here, and we are a team, and we have to solve the problem together. So how do we get to a place where you can feel good and I can feel good and this problem is resolved?
So, do you say, oh gosh, Flora, this happened, but what can we do about it so this doesn't happen again later? Like, but
Uh,
we can say that now, but in the heat of the moment, I probably won't be saying that. I'll be like, Flora, you did this. This is BS.
Right,
Like,
exactly.
how do we control our emotions, and do we just have to think, okay, don't jump to conclusions, but let's see what we can do to solve this for the future, to make it
Yeah,
better.
yeah. I mean, it's hard because every situation is different, especially when there's like emotions involved. First of all, don't argue when you're emotional. Let's start there. It's the worst possible time. You're not going to get anything resolved. Your frontal lobe is not functioning completely. Your amygdala is activated, which is, your fight or flight response. And so you're not really completely cohesive, when you're emotional. So the most important thing is to resolve your own emotions first. And this goes, the avoidant will naturally take space because that's their coping mechanism. The anxious person wants to resolve right away. And a lot of times the anxious person resolves through conflict, which is the opposite of what the avoidant person. But the avoidant person is typically conflict averse, right? So they're running from any kinds of conversation. But the anxious person is like, no, I want to figure this out. Do you love me or don't you love me? And tell me now. I need to know right now. So the important thing is to understand your own emotions first, take a step back, sit with yourself, really figure out how you're feeling, why you're feeling this way, where it's actually coming from, right? Because a lot of times you think it's out here, you did this, so I feel this, but it's usually, I feel this because in my last relationship, I was treated in a certain way and it made me feel like there's something wrong with me. And now you're triggering that part of me that makes me feel like there's something wrong with me. But really, if you think about it, I know that there's nothing wrong with me. So maybe I don't even have to have the conversation at that point, right? Once you've gone through the whole, really like integrated this, you realize a lot of times like, oh, this isn't about him. This was like some internal trigger for me. And I can figure this out for myself. I don't even have to talk to him about it. A lot of times you will. Obviously, it's a relationship, and you don't want to get re-triggered constantly. But it can be that can be an avenue for resolution too.
Very nice, very nice. So as you've learned all this stuff in the past few years, do you find that, oh, maybe dating can be a lot easier going online now that you're armed with all this information versus when you were first doing online dating? You're like, man, this is hard. I can see why there's so many single people. But now that you know all this stuff, is it easier for you to be online dating and meeting people? And do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
how has
yeah,
it
yeah.
been for you?
It's easier for me to be me. It's easier for me to be feel confident, comfortable, and trust in myself, in my intuition, in what I want, my standards, my boundaries. But a lot of people haven't done the work, so you do still run into, not still, mostly you run into people that have not done the work online. And I think, if you want to talk about online dating, I mean, that I'm also a matchmaker separately from this, but online dating has so many pitfalls and it's created such a weird um, world for us single people that is so inorganic that I have a lot of issues with online dating. Not to say I don't use it, because I do use it as a single divorced woman, but I wish we had really different avenues. But I think that the ease of use makes it almost unavoidable, the convenience factor.
How do you do online dating? And if I've done the work and I want to find somebody who's also worked on themselves or have some kind of self-help awareness about themselves, should I put that on an online dating profile to say, hey, I've done all this work on myself and I'm also looking for someone who's also self-aware? Like, is there a nice way to put that on a online dating profile?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's it. You know, I've seen a lot of profiles from men that say things of that nature, and I don't think there's anything wrong with a woman saying that as well. I do think the caveat is that um, people people who have done work on themselves and who are self-aware, we're all at different spaces and different levels of it. And you don't know, just because somebody says that they do that, it doesn't mean the same thing to you that it does to them. Or they may not be at the same place or same level. And not to say that there's a hierarchy, but there's just different, you know, we all navigate this in a different way. So I don't know, they might be self-aware about certain mindset things, but not self-aware about the emotional stuff. And you know, so it's something just to kind of keep in the back of your mind, to that you're still getting to know people. And the most important part is that your core and strength is clear to you, and you're living from your authentic, as much of an authentic space as you possibly can, and you're willing to be aware of your you know, your mistakes and your pitfalls and your you know, inability to see something. Because, you know, as much as we grow, we all still have blind spots, and we all have room for growth.
I think that's actually very well said, that you can do the work and have all this knowledge and self-awareness about what you like and don't like and how to respond, but yet there are still blind spots that you haven't worked through or that you weren't aware of. And so I guess what you're saying is, as long as you know who you are and what you're looking for, then you could better have a plan to find that partner who you can tolerate and who you can share
Hopefully more
stuff with, right?
tolerate.
I mean, really, that's it. Like, as far as dating goes, I mean, we all have pitfalls and shortcomings, but what are you willing to tolerate with this person? You know, like, what degree are you willing to tolerate of his shortcomings?
Yeah,
And, you know, even I've been with my partner, my husband, for 16 years now. We've been married for 6. It's like, what am I willing to tolerate of him? Like, gosh, do we fight anymore? Yes, of course we do. We haven't ran out of topics to fight about in 16 years, but there are some things that I could tolerate. And just knowing what I know about myself now, I feel like, okay, you know what? That's not a big deal anymore. I don't want to fight about it. Just
right.
gonna move on. I'm not
Yeah.
going to hold stuff in and feel resentment and all that. Like, yeah. Anyway,
No, no, I'm totally with that. And it's also like, what are you willing to accept? Because there's, you know, the good outweighs the bad, right? Because sometimes people, you know, my cousin has like a great relationship with her husband, but he constantly will throw his laundry right next to the laundry bin, next to it, not in it. And it dries or not. I mean, this is a small, tiny example, but you know, these kinds of things, if the relationship isn't healthy, ends up blowing up into much bigger issues. And so she's willing to tolerate this little annoyance because he's great in other ways, you know?
how do we spin that little thing into something more positive? Like, is it now it's a joke and she accepts it and now it's like cute that he does it? Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
how do we tolerate these little things in our lives that could bug us but not let it bug us?
Yeah. I mean, I think that again, it's like when you've done the work yourself, right? And when you haven't done the work, okay, something like that could feel disrespectful to you, right? It could feel like he doesn't respect the fact that I have to then pick it up. He doesn't care about our environment. He, you know, and it somehow it becomes about you. But when you've done the work, you recognize that most things are not about you, has nothing to do with you. This is how he is. This is how he functions. For whatever blockage there is, he doesn't see the laundry thing, and or he doesn't want to throw it in there. There's something that's his problem. You know, it's nothing about you. Can you live with somebody that just won't do that? You know, that just that's his style.
Is that where you say, gosh, he's such a great dad to all of our kids and he provides a roof over our head. Of course he can throw whatever clothes he wants on the floors. No big deal. Like, I guess you just have to like think of the bigger picture sometimes, right? I mean, not just
Yeah.
in this scenario, but like with a lot of things. I think as we get older, I
Uh-huh.
feel like these little things don't bother me as much if I know, I guess I'm more secure, right, in my relationship that I won't be offended by this little thing that he did and I don't take it personally. It's not a sign of disrespect. It's like, okay, it's just him, his little
Yeah,
quirk, but he's so
exactly.
great at all these other things, you
Yeah,
know?
exactly, exactly. Yeah, so it's the insecurity, and that's, I guess, like a great like quick tip kind of thing, is when you're making the things somebody else does about you somehow.
Right.
So if like in dating, if he's not calling you, somehow there's something wrong with you, right? That's the insecurity speaking. He may not be calling you because he's not interested, but that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. That just means that you guys aren't a match.
Yeah. Yeah. I know you said that you've been doing this work for a long time in the dating industry and you're a relationship coach
Uh-huh.
and a matchmaker. So, what are some tips that you've learned in the last 5+ years in this industry that you're like, I really wish I would have known this sooner? Like, I really wish this tip everybody would know.
Yeah,
What would that
yeah.
be?
Well, I mean, number one, it would be learn your attachment style, understand it, understand what it means, learn about the attachment styles in general. The other thing would be, I think what I said is, not rejection isn't about you. It's, and I hate to use these kind of cheesy like social media like memes, but rejection is redirection. It is really an opportunity to move in a different direction, uh, and find something that is better for you. So that is, I think, a really big lesson. And I mean, there's probably so many more like I could come up with it like on the spot. Yeah, I think that, ultimately like taking things personally uh is a really big no-no. I think that there's a much when you're secure, that it has not most of the time it has nothing to do with you. Like when an avoidant, I deal a lot with the attachment style stuff on social media, and I make a lot of videos where a lot of anxious people that are in relationship with avoidance are devastated and can't comprehend how they could possibly, after all this like loving, caring, the way that they presented, loving and caring in the beginning, and then they could just turn around and like go cold. And it has nothing to do with the anxious person. Nothing. It's the avoidance person. It's their attachment style. It's their issue. It's their problem to resolve. It's their therapy to do for themselves. But it is very difficult to understand when you're, the person on the other side of that. And it feels very personal. It feels like, there must be something wrong with me that he left or she left.
So, aside from the book Attached, is there another book out there that you recommend that people should read that really has helped you with your dating, with your lifestyle and all that? Like something that's really been a huge help to you?
There's another book called What's in the Way is the Way. And that would be another, I guess, also just like kind of point, which is when you're triggered, when you start immediately blaming what's outside of yourself, stop for a minute and look inward and ask yourself, why are you so triggered by this thing? And that's essentially kind of, the book has a lot of exercises and ways to figure it out, but it's called What's in the Way is the Way. And it's a very, one of my favorite books.
Nice, nice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tell me how people can work with you, what What's your ideal client?
My ideal client is somebody that's struggling in their dating life and they can't figure out why, or they know that it's their attachment style, or they know that they understand that there are certain patterns in their dating life that they don't like, and they recognize that they're hitting a wall. And that would be somebody who's my ideal client. I coach, so I do programs. I will be doing a retreat October 23rd to 26th, which is on my website. You can find out more information there. It's called Relearn to Love, based on your attachment style. And that will be in Southern California. I will be doing talks in the San Francisco Bay Area at a studio about this exact topic. And and then of course, I have an 8-week coaching program and a course online as well called Finding the One, because after all, you are the one.
I love it. I love it. I will put all that information in the show notes. And just thank you so much today, Flora, for your knowledge and such an important topic. I feel like everyone can benefit by finding out what their attachment style is and how they could better grow as a person, especially in dating and to find love, and also apply this to other parts of your life, right? Just to be aware. So can't go wrong with that. So thank you so much for your time. And ladies, if you're single out there, would love to set you up. Please go to twoasianmatchmakers.com, fill out a profile with me so I can find you. And thank you so much. I will talk to you later. Bye, Flora. Thank you.